Hello, everybody. Professor Barth here, Associate Professor of History at Arizona State University. Welcome to part 5 of our section on John Locke, itself part of a larger lecture series entitled Foundations of Western Political Thought. Today, Fighting Tyranny, Resistance and Revolution. This is Locke at his finest and at his most radical. If you haven't already seen part 4, The Forms of Civil Government, check that out. We have part 3, From Nature to War to Civil Government. Part 2 was the historical context, and part 1, the introduction. Check those videos out if you have not already. So, last time for part 4, we noted how Locke acknowledged a chain of power and authority that exists on Earth between the various powers. And at the very top is God himself. God is the ultimate supreme power. Locke makes this clear. It is from God that we get our natural rights. God hands down sovereignly created natural law. But then of the powers, of the temporal powers, the people are supreme over the government. And Locke makes that very, very clear, and that's vital to today's discussion on the rights of the people to resist tyranny. The people are supreme on earth. Underneath the people, the legislative branch is the supreme branch within the civil government apparatus, and then the executive. The executive has powers. We discussed that in part 4 of last time. But within civil government the legislative power is supreme over the executive. If you take a look at our Constitution, Article 1 deals with Congress, not the presidency. Locke said in his second treatise that the community, or the people, perpetually retains a supreme power of saving themselves from the attempts and designs of any body, even of their legislators, whenever they shall be so foolish or so wicked as to lay and carry on designs against the liberties and properties of the subject, and thus the community may be said in this respect to be always the supreme power. At the header of our Constitution, of course, we the people. You'll remember from part 4, Locke described the legislative power as a fiduciary power. We the people entrust the legislature to do what? To secure these ends: peace, safety, and the public good. Meaning that government, quote, can never have a right to destroy, enslave, or designedly to impoverish the subjects. What is tyranny? Tyranny, Locke says, is the exercise of power beyond right, which no body can have a right to. Tyranny is a power that wantonly violates natural rights. When the governor, Locke says, makes not the law, but his will the rule, and his commands and actions are not directed to the preservation of the properties of the people, but the satisfaction of his own ambition, revenge, covetousness, or any other irregular passion. Once you've reached that point, you are now in a tyranny, ladies and gentlemen. And so, how should the people respond? What do you do when tyranny takes hold? When law ends? When the rule of law is no longer in place? Do the people have any refuge? What can the people do as the supreme power? And that's what Locke will deal with today. So, let's begin. In all states and conditions, Locke says, the true remedy of force without authority is to oppose force to it. Okay, whenever force is used unlawfully, without authority, it is lawful to resist that force with what? An opposite force, an opposing force. Someone breaks into your house, you have a right, a natural right, endowed by your creator, to resist that unlawful force with force. Okay, this is why the Second Amendment is a very cherished right for self-defense in that particular instance. Well, what happens when a power or an individual uses force without authority? Well, they've now created a state of war. The use of force without authority, Locke says, always puts him that uses it into a state of war as the aggressor and renders him liable to be treated accordingly. Again, someone breaks into your house, they have, in effect, declared a state of war between themselves and you have the lawful, natural right to resist that with force. Remember, the purpose of civil government was to remove the state of war, that in a state of nature, things so happen to the natural condition of mankind created the conditions in which men found themselves in a perpetual and constant state of war, a constant state of fear. And so men agreed via the social contract to establish civil government. Well, if the purpose of government is to escape that state of war, and now all of a sudden a power, whether a private power or a public power, a governmental power, now creates a state of war, it is only natural to oppose force to it. So, for example, Locke poses this hypothetical question. What if the executive power, meaning the king, or in our case, the president or the governor of a state, forcibly dissolves the legislative power and refuses to allow the legislature to assemble? Now, back in Locke's day, the king, the monarch, had prerogative rights to dissolve a legislature, and in fact, King Charles I, prior to the English Civil War, ruled without a parliament for 11 years. What if the executive power does something like this, dissolves the legislative power? Remember, according to Locke, the legislative power is supreme over the executive power because it represents the people. Locke answers, well, using force upon the people without authority, and contrary to the trust put in him, is a state of war with the people. So now, if the king does that, or the president does that, doesn't allow the legislature to even meet, the people now have a right, Locke says, to reinstate their legislative and the exercise of their power. And the people even have a right to remove that executive power by force. This is what happened during the English Civil War. King Charles I was executed, in fact, over this. But it's not just a tyrannical executive that the people can oppose. Locke says, no, a tyrannical legislature. Yes, you can have a legislature that becomes a tyranny. Locke says, quote, whenever the legislators endeavor to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves into a state of war with the people. This is a constant theme in Locke, especially in this section on fighting tyranny. This return to the state of war. It violates the social contract, though. Again, the whole point of establishing civil government was to exit that state of war. Now the state of war has been reintroduced. And worse, by government, by the executive power or by the legislative power. Well, when this happens, when the legislative power or the executive power put themselves into a state of war with the people are, quote, thereupon absolved from any farther obedience, and are left to the common refuge which God hath provided for all men against force and violence. What is that common refuge? Well, opposing force with force. You don't have a choice, okay? Pacifism, through history, there have been many groups that are drawn to pacifism. Pacifism is not a realistic worldview. It's just not. Even Christ was not a pacifist. That might be a controversial statement to some people. I won't delve any further into that so we don't go too far afield. But in this world, God has authorized the use of force against unlawful force. That's the key. Against unlawful force, against unlawful violence. And that is the common refuge, and that's what is left to the people when their own government puts themselves into a state of war with the people. Whensoever, therefore, the legislative shall transgress this fundamental rule of society, and either by ambition, fear, folly, or corruption, endeavor to grasp themselves or put into the hands of any other an absolute power over the lives, liberties, and estates of the people, by this breach of trust, they now forfeit the power that the people had put into their hands for quite contrary ends. So, first of all, you read this. A legislative power taken up with by ambition, fear, folly, and corruption. Woo! Does this not describe many legislative powers across this world? Ambition, fear, folly, and corruption. Well, in this case that Locke is describing, this is an especially egregious ambition-seeking and corrupt legislative power. So egregious that they now seek absolute power. Absolute power over what? Look at that. Life, liberty, and estates or property. Life, liberty, property. What is that? Oh, that's your natural rights. The natural rights of the people are being trampled upon by this foolish, corrupt, out of control legislature. When that happens, the legislature, in effect, has forfeited the power. Why? Well, it was a fiduciary power. It was the source of their power had always come from the people. Now that they've declared war on the people, let's continue with Locke. Quote, it devolves to the people who have a right to resume their original liberty. And by the establishment of a new legislative, as such as they shall think fit, provide for their own safety and security. One of the reasons why it is wise to make the legislative power democratic, a small d democratic, is the fact that a democratic legislative power allows for the people to change the legislature without having to revolt. Revolution is bloody. Revolution is it's not fun, even when it's necessary. Sometimes it's necessary, and it has been necessary in history, such as our own revolution in 1770. People always say 1776. It actually began in 1775. That was necessary, but the democratic process does allow for this other method of changing the legislative power without having to plunge into civil war. Even so, what if that even does not change anything, and you find that no matter what happens, the legislative power is constantly corrupt, constantly ambitious, constantly tyrannical? There is this other there is this alternative means. It's extreme, is in a case of extremity. Look at that in a moment. But it is a power of the people, and if you deny that the people have that power, then you are effectively denying that the people are the supreme power. You are saying that government is supreme over the people. If you truly believe that the people are the supreme power on earth over the government, then you have to just for the sake of logical consistency, concede that the people do have a power to alter their government when it becomes unlawful. When the heads of state, executive or legislative, seek, quote, to enslave or destroy, end quote, the community, the people, Locke says, have no other remedy in this, as in all other cases where they have no judge on earth, but to appeal to heaven. What is Locke saying here? When the government becomes so tyrannical, and there's no, you've tried voting out the bad legislators, and the corruption continues, and you've tried everything. You've taken it to the courts, to the judiciary. But the judiciary isn't solving anything. It's just tyranny, tyranny, tyranny. Boot stamped on a human face. There's no judge on earth that you can resort to. First of all, if that's the case, you are in a bad situation. Thankfully, in this country, we do have checks and balances. But when there is no judge on earth in which the people can find remedy against tyrannical acts, the only other remedy is to appeal to heaven. What does Locke mean by this? Appeal to heaven? Well, cry out to God and resist by force. Take up arms. The flag you see here, in appeal to heaven, it was actually adopted in October of 1775 for the maritime force under General Washington. It wasn't a large force. The colonists, which that's what they were in October of 75, they hadn't yet declared independence. Colonists didn't have much of a navy to speak of, but what they had, this was the flag that they adopted. You see, an appeal to heaven. What does that come from? Well, it comes straight from Locke. Locke was widely read on the eve of the Revolution, and the colonists essentially were saying, we've tried everything. There's no judge on earth at present that is able to counter this tyranny, and so it's time to appeal to heaven. Time to resist. Cry out to God in prayer, fasting, and humiliation, and exercise the God-given powers and rights of the people to counter unlawful government. Patrick Henry, in his famous "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death" speech in March of 1775, said the following: "If we wish to be free, we must fight. I repeat it, sir, we must fight. An appeal to arms and to the God of hosts is all that is left us." What is this? An appeal to arms and to the God of hosts. An appeal to heaven. An appeal to heaven. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Now, be mindful of how you use use this power, people. So yes, do the people have a power to resist tyrannical government? They do. However, Locke says, and is careful to emphasize, and it's something that we need to always remember, force is to be opposed to nothing but to unjust and unlawful force. You are not to use force against lawful force, because then that makes you unlawful, not the government. Whoever makes any opposition in any other case, Locke says, draws on himself a just condemnation, both from God and man. If you just go around rebelling for the sake of rebelling, or at a slight act of, dare I say, even tyranny, say, oh, that's it, let's plunge the whole country into this Civil War revolution. You have, in this case, drawn on yourself a just condemnation, both from God and man. This reminds me of the passage, chapter 3 of Paul's epistle to the Romans, very famous chapter, oftentimes a misunderstood chapter. Paul says this in Romans 13, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there's no authority except from God." God's the supreme, right? "And those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed. And those who resist will incur judgment." Sounds a lot like Locke. "For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval, for he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain." Now, this passage in Romans has been abused by tyrants, as it so happens in the past, who have pointed to Romans 13 to argue that the people have no right whatsoever to counter unlawful, tyrannical government. But that's not what Paul is saying here. And in fact, if you look at Holy Scripture, there are many cases throughout the Bible in which individuals and the people at large have resisted unlawful, tyrannical government. And so that can't be what Paul is saying here. This isn't an absolute prohibition on revolting against in all cases to government. What Paul is saying here is that when you have a legitimate, lawful governing authority, and for all the faults of the Roman Empire and some of the individual particular Roman emperors, the Roman Empire at large was a legitimate, lawful authority. If you resist that legitimate, lawful authority, you have now drawn on yourself this just condemnation, both from God and man. So Locke emphasizes that for good reason. And again, it's something that we always must keep in mind. Reckless acts of rebellion against lawful authority is not only unwise, but very destructive. But there are cases, and there are cases in which it is perfectly legitimate to counter authority when it crosses that line into full-blown tyranny. Now, Locke continues with this hypothetical question from from someone who an objection that somebody might throw out to Locke's theory. So here's the question. So may the commands then of a prince be opposed? May he be resisted as often as anyone shall find himself aggrieved, and but imagine he has not right done him? This will unhinge and overturn all polities, and instead of government and order, leave nothing but anarchy and confusion. You see this objection quite often. Hobbes put forward this objection. Hobbes said, look, if you allow for people to revolt against their rulers, it's just going to overturn all order. You're just going to have anarchy and confusion, and you cannot allow this doctrine of resistance against tyranny. Well, Locke answers this objection. This doctrine, Locke says, of the lawfulness of resisting all unlawful exercises of his power will not upon every slight occasion endanger the ruler or embroil the government. For where the injured party may be relieved and his damages repaired by appeal to the law, there can be no pretense for force, which is only to be used where a man is intercepted from appealing to the law. So as long as the injured party may appeal to the law, right? There is, even if the executive or the legislative does something wrong or unlawful or transgresses a right, you do not have a right to resist that government so long as there is this possibility for appeal. You are to resort to other things before you resort to that extremity. And Locke here is also saying, look, this isn't going to happen, again, upon every slight occasion. You know, a bad law here, a bad law there, or even a transgressing a right here or a right there. That's not how it works. This is but when it's only when there's a pattern More on that in a moment. Locke dwells on this question a lot. Isn't this just going to create a situation where there's constant revolution, constant rebellion, and anarchy, confusion everywhere, no order whatsoever? And Locke is very careful to show how that is not the case. But if the unlawful acts done by the magistrate be maintained, and the remedy which is due by law be by the same power obstructed, so there is no appeal to law, then they have a right to defend themselves and to recover by force what by unlawful force is taken from them. If these illegal acts have extended to the majority of the people, or if the mischief and oppression has lighted only on some few, but in such cases as the precedent and consequences seem to threaten all, how will they be hindered from resisting illegal force? Stated differently, how are you going to persuade the people that they don't have a right to resist illegal force when they perceive that that the actions of this tyranny are now threatening them all? They're going to counter, they're going to resist. So in light of that, let's construct a theory of when the people have a right to resistance, and that's what Locke is seeking to do here. Nor let anyone think this lays a perpetual foundation for disorder, for this operates not, meaning revolution, resistance, this operates not till the inconvenience is so great that the majority feel it and are weary of it and find a necessity to have it amended. This doesn't happen very often. The people are not going to resort to drastic measures unless the inconvenience is and the tyranny is immense. That's what Locke is saying. Another hypothetical objection. Here it is. Here's the objection that Locke will answer. Well, the people being ignorant and always discontented to lay the foundation of government in the unsteady opinion and uncertain humor of the people is to expose it to certain ruin, and no government will be able long to subsist. Look, the people, they're fickle. Don't you understand? The people are fickle. They're ignorant. They're prone to some demagogue that's going to go around and persuade them that it's time to rise up. And if you lay the foundation of government on such an unsteady opinion, you're just going to have you can't have government. The government won't be able to continue for long at all. Locke answers, quite the contrary. People, Locke says, are not so easily got out of their old forms as some are apt to suggest. They are hardly to be prevailed with to amend the acknowledged faults in the frame they have been accustomed to. And if there be any original defects or adventitious ones introduced by times or corruption, 'tis not an easy thing to get them changed, even when all the world sees there is an opportunity for it. There is, in fact, a slowness and aversion in the people to quit their old constitutions. Say it differently, actually, the people are not typically eager to revolt. The people are not typically eager to change their government. The people, by and large, are typically are most comfortable with what they are familiar with. People are not easily got out of their old forms. It's not easy to get even acknowledged faults changed. People are comfortable, again, with what they are familiar with. And so, actually, Locke says this is a misperception about the people, that the people are just, if you give the people this power to revolt against tyrannical government, they're going to just want to do it all the time. Locke says, no, that's not the case. If anything, if there is a fault in the people, it's that they're too slow to counter tyranny. They're too averse to changing those parts of their old constitutions that have faults. Another objection that Locke will answer. Here's the objection. This hypothesis lays a ferment for frequent rebellion. No more than any other hypothesis, Locke answers. For when the people are made miserable and find themselves exposed to the ill usage of arbitrary power, cry up their governors as much as you will for sons of Jupiter. Let them be sacred and divine. The pharaohs were supposedly divine and all the rest. Tell the people that their rulers are descended or authorized from heaven. The same will happen. The people, generally ill-treated and contrary to right, will be ready upon any occasion to ease themselves of a burden that sits heavy upon them. So, Locke, in other words, says, you can talk all you want about how sacred the rulers are, and the fact of the matter is, the people, if they are ill-treated by constant, arbitrary, tyrannical acts, are going to do something about it. Okay? And so, my hypothesis, Locke says, is to call it that it lays a ferment for frequent rebellion is not the case. The people are going to act when their rulers become as tyrannical as described here. He must have lived but a little while in the world, Locke says, who has not seen examples of this in his time, and he must have read very little who cannot produce examples of it in all sorts of governments in the world. Throughout history, the people from time to time rebel, revolt, and they don't need John Locke to do it. It's sort of innate within the people that when things reach a certain level, they're going to do it. The the French masses in 1789 were not reading John Locke. Now, the leading revolutionaries were, but the masses weren't reading John Locke. And in fact, actually, the masses in what became the United States, in colonial America, were not reading John Locke in 1774, 1775. The leaders were, but the masses weren't. They understood that just innately that when government becomes tyrannical, the people have this right to counter and alter their government. Secondly, I answer, such revolutions happen not upon every little mismanagement in public affairs, great mistakes in the ruling part, many wrong and inconvenient laws, and all the slips of human frailty will be borne by the people without mutiny or murmur. Again, Locke goes back to this idea that people aren't just going to willy-nilly revolt. The people will put up with a lot. Like, look at our country, look at our own country. I mean, can you imagine if Americans from a few generations ago, like 3 or 4, saw what's going on in the United States of America? They'd be like, "What?" But the people just put up with it. And Locke's saying, those of you who think this is frequent rebellion, it's not frequent rebellion. No, Locke says. They're not just, again, upon every slight occasion, rebel. But if a long train of abuses, prevarications, and artifices, all tending the same way, make the design visible to the people, and they cannot but feel what they lie under and see whither they are going, 'tis not to be wondered that they should then rouse themselves and endeavor to put the rule into such hands which may secure to them the ends for which government was at first erected. A long train of abuses, prevarications. That's a word you don't really hear much anymore. Prevaricate means to mislead, to lie, to deceive. So you got this tyrannical government. It's just lying. And artifice is trickery. Just a dishonest, corrupt, abusive, unlawful government. Once you have this long train, not just one thing here and there, long train. all tending the same way. You can't deny it anymore. It's so visible. And here's the other thing. It's a design. The design, it's deliberate. The hubris of this tyrannical state. There's no longer any denying it. Then the people are going to rouse themselves. And you shouldn't be surprised that they shall rouse themselves. It's happening. It's going to happen, whether they read John Locke or not. Okay? Because that's just how it is. The people know when their government becomes tyrannical. They're not quick to act. In fact, they're slow to act. Quite slow. They'll put up with a lot. But at a certain point, enough's enough. Locke says. Thirdly, I answer. What's he answering again? Let's just remind ourselves. This hypothesis lays a ferment for frequent rebellion. Frequent rebellion. All right. Well, let's see. Thirdly, I answer that this power in the people is the best fence against rebellion, and the most likely means to hinder it. This doctrine is actually your best protection against rebellion. Why is that? Well, it's a warning. So long as it's acknowledged that the people have this power, the rulers know and understand that it might be that the people have this power, that this check exists, and so they're less likely to become tyrannical. Locke points out it's tyrants who are the ones who are truly and properly rebels. The rebels aren't the people, it's the tyrant who's the rebel, because he has brought back again the state of war. Who's the rebel? The one who is innocently victimized by this tyranny? Or is it the ruler who has now broken the social contract and reintroduced the state of war? Obviously, the tyrant is the rebel. Obviously, the tyrant is the one who is liable for whatever happens next. And so this doctrine of the power in the people, it's the best fence against rebellion. Locke says, quote, "The properest way to prevent the evil is to show them," that is the rulers, "the danger and injustice of it, who are under the greatest temptation to run into it." There are certain men out there who are greatly tempted to exercise arbitrary tyrannical power. It's sick, but it exists. We see it all throughout history. For all of human history, there's always been this temptation, this lust for power. And so the greatest way to prevent that maniac from becoming a tyrant is to show them that actually becoming a tyrant for you will be very dangerous, because the people they will resist, they will counter you, and your reign will not be long. I mean, can we say at this point, this is based Locke, okay? I'll go all Gen Z on you. I told you, Locke at his finest, in my opinion. Locke at his finest. Highlighting the remedies of the people, the supreme power on earth, against this tyrannical government. Oh, tyrant, be mindful, be watchful, because this power exists and it's real. Locke didn't create this power. Locke didn't invent this doctrine. He's acknowledging it. He's bringing it to light. He's fleshing it out. But it exists. Whether you like Locke or not, the people will counter unlawful, arbitrary force when it's, again, this long train of abuses, prevarications, and artifices. But if they who say it lays a foundation for rebellion mean that it may occasion civil wars or internal broils, Locke continues, to tell the people they are absolved from obedience when illegal attempts are made upon their liberties, and that therefore this doctrine is not to be allowed, it may cause a civil war. So you can't spread this doctrine. You can't talk about this. You're not allowed to say that the people have this power. It's going to destroy, it undermines order and undermines peace. Well, Locke says, they may as well say upon the same ground that honest men may not oppose robbers or pirates because this may occasion disorder or bloodshed. Again, to go back to the analogy at the beginning of the video, someone, breaks into your house. You have to say that, if you say that the person who lives in a house should use force against that robber, well, that may create bloodshed and may create violence. You should just allow the robber to go in and do what he wants. Well, obviously you wouldn't say that. No, of course the man whose home is invaded has a right to oppose the robber. Duh. Well, why? Because if you don't have that doctrine of opposition to a robber breaking into your house, then what message does that send to potential robbers? Hey, you can break in anytime you want, take whatever you want, nobody's going to use any force against you. In a similar manner, if you don't have a doctrine of the supremacy of the people over tyrannical government, then that just sends a message to tyrants, hey, just have a field day. The people can't do anything about it. If any mischief come in such cases, that is, when the people stand up to tyrants, is not to be charged upon him who defends his own right, but on him that invades his neighbors. Okay. It's not the man's fault whose home was invaded that, bloodshed and violence resulted from countering the home invasion. No, it's the fault of the invader. It's the fault of the tyrant. It's not the fault of the people. Don't blame the people if civil war violence breaks out because the government became tyrannical. Blame the tyrant. Blame the man who reintroduced the state of war. The end of government is the good of mankind, Locke says. And which is best for mankind? That the people should be always exposed to the boundless will of tyranny? Or that the rulers should sometimes be liable to be opposed when they grow exorbitant in the use of their power? Another hypothetical objection. But will this not encourage rebellion and unrest as often as it shall please a busy head or turbulent spirit to desire the alteration of the government? Aren't there people out there that are just troublemakers? And if this doctrine is being spread about the resistance to tyranny, these troublemakers will, through demagoguery, persuade the people to these extremities. 'Tis true, Locke says, such men may stir whenever they please, but it will only be to their own just ruin and perdition. For till the mischief be grown general and the ill designs of the rulers become visible, the people, who are more disposed to suffer than right themselves by resistance, are not apt to stir. The examples of particularly injustice or oppression of here and there an unfortunate man moves them not. People are not going to just follow some busy head, as he described them. People are not just going to follow some troublemaker who seeks to overturn order and create chaos and overturn the government. They're not going to do that if the tyranny has not grown immense. Like, why would they do that? People are more apt to put up with abuses here and there, and they're not just going to revolt at the drop of a hat. But if they universally have a persuasion grounded upon manifest evidence that designs is deliberate, and it's manifest, it's just palpable, it's plainly obvious to the majority that designs are carrying on against their liberties, and the general course and tendency of things cannot but give them strong suspicions of the evil intention of their governors, who's to be blamed for it? Obviously the tyrant. obviously the government is to be blamed for it. If the people have come to this awareness about the manifest designs against their liberties, are the people to be blamed if they have the sense of rational creatures and can think of things no otherwise than as they find and feel them? Yeah, but the people know. And is it not rather their fault who puts things in such a posture? Of course it's the tyrant's fault. It's not the people's fault. I grant, Locke says, that the pride, ambition, and turbulency of private men have sometimes caused great disorders in commonwealths, and factions have been fatal to states and kingdoms. Yeah, you do have troublemakers who occasionally rouse up people. It happens. Locke's not denying that it's happened throughout history. You know, you see examples of this really in every country throughout human history. But whether the mischief hath oftener begun in the people's wantonness or recklessness and the desire to cast off the lawful authority of the rulers, or in the rulers' insolence and endeavors to get and exercise an arbitrary power over the people, whether oppression or disobedience gave the first rise to the disorder, I leave it to impartial history to determine. If you look at human history, when you have a breakdown in civil wars and all these problems, civil government dissolved, and more often than not, the root cause of that situation is not disobedience from the people. The root cause is oppression. It's usually, not in every single case, but most of the time in human history, it's been oppression that has given first rise to the disorder. It's rare that you see it just originate within some busy head or turbulent spirit. No, it usually begins with just actual flat out oppression, and then things begin to snowball from there. And then sometimes a turbulent spirit, a troublemaker, can take advantage of that situation where in a situation where the government has become tyrannical and oppressive and can exploit that and use that. I've argued that that's what happened with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. I mean, the Tsarist Russia had a lot of problems, okay? But then you had Tsarist Russia was, very oppressive in many respects, but then you had these other factions that took advantage of the situation, sort of captured the resistance, the revolution, and then became tyrants in their own right. This I am sure, Locke says, whoever, either ruler or subject, by force goes about to invade the rights of either prince or people, and lays a foundation for overturning the constitution and frame of any just government, he is guilty of the greatest crime I think a man is capable of. Why is this the greatest crime that a man is capable of? Well, he says, all the things that result from disorder, the bloodshed, the violence, the breaking to pieces of government. It's not a smooth process. It's a very nasty, ugly thing when civil government begins to break down. And so wherever the breakdown originates, whether in a tyrant or in the case of some troublemaker, busybody, turbulent demagogue, whoever initiates this is again guilty of the greatest crime I think a man is capable of. Locke believes, and I think he's correct, that more often than not it originates in an oppressive government, in a tyrant. And so it's the tyrant who's guilty of the greatest crime that a man is capable of, and he who does it is justly to be esteemed the common enemy and pest of mankind, and is to be treated accordingly. That is the man who reintroduces a state of war. Question: Who shall be judge whether the prince or legislative act contrary to their trust? Very good question. So, okay, let's say we accept this theory, Mr. Locke. Who's to make the judgment? Who is to decide if the executive or the legislative power has violated their trust and has now forfeited their power? This was the main objection of Hobbes, if you remember, if you watched our series on Hobbes. Hobbes asked this question. He said, look, if you allow for this doctrine, who makes the decision that the government is acting contrary to their trust? Locke answers, well, the people shall be judged. The people shall be judged. If a controversy arise betwixt the prince and some of the people, in a matter where the law is silent or doubtful and the thing be of great consequence, I should think that the proper umpire in such a case should be the body of the people. The people will make the decision. Why are the people judge? Why do the people make the decision? Why do they make the judgment? Because, again, they are the supreme power. The people are the supreme power on earth over the civil government. There's Locke's case for resisting tyranny. And boy, it would be quite an incomplete video if I didn't point out the similarities between the ideas we just discussed and our own Declaration of Independence. There's Independence Hall in Philadelphia. On June 7th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee, a delegate representing Virginia in the Second Continental Congress, put forward a motion that the colonies now be declared free and independent states. It was debated. The vote was put off for several weeks, but in the interim, the Congress had Thomas Jefferson and a few others, including Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, draft a Declaration of Independence. Here's a picture of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, creating our great nation. And the Declaration read this way: when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. In other words, it would be wrong to simply say we're independent without explaining why independence had become necessary. And so the whole point of the Declaration of Independence was to prove that the Americans had a right to declare themselves independent from Great Britain. And and Jefferson explains, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. These are rights that are inherent within you. They cannot be separated from you. They were given to you by God. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. Isn't this the point that Locke belabored over and over? Almost to you're like, man, there's some repetition here from Locke. It comes out in the Declaration of Independence. Look, the people are not to do something on this scale for light and transient causes. Accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. This is pure Locke. I mean, you can tell Jefferson read Locke. Mankind are not disposed to just revolt. That's not how people operate. They're, if anything, more disposed to just put up with tyrannical acts. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. If you needed any other convincing that Jefferson read Locke, look no further. A long train of abuses. This is straight from Locke. Long train of abuses. And then this idea, a design. This isn't accidental. This isn't some bad or foolish law. No, this is a long train of tyrannical laws that proves a design, a deliberate action by that government to reduce the people under absolute despotism. So to the point where it's not only the right of the people, it is their duty. It is their duty as men to throw off such government. Man, isn't the Declaration of Independence a beautiful document? I love the Declaration of Independence. Woo! Every time I read it, fantastic. Part 5. Hope you enjoyed this one. We have one more part left in this section on John Locke. The labor theory of property. I saved this for the end because I didn't want to break up our discussion of Locke too much. Locke's theory of property is really, really interesting, and I'd like to flesh that out a little more. We'll do that, and that will conclude our section on John Locke. So I'll see you next time.